Now I'm going to show you a third way of loading up virtual instruments, and that's going to be through a program called Maschine. Now, Maschine's kind of been lurking back here this whole time. This is the Maschine controller. Maschine is actually a platform by Native Instruments that has a hardware component and a software component. It's actually a really excellent drum machine, hence the word machine. Maschine, spelled M-A-S-C-H-I-N-E, is actually pronounced Maschine, technically. It's the word for machine in German. Native Instruments is a German company. Just to give you an idea of why things are called Contact with a K and Complete with a K and Machine with a SC instead of just a C as it is in English. That's the reason why. So Maschine is actually a really amazing platform. It's not a DAW, it is a groove box. And what that means is it started out as a beat making platform and evolved from there. So the first version of Maschine did not have any kind of functionality to load up virtual instruments at all. That was added after the fact, I think after the first 2 years of having Maschine, which is when I started using it back in 2011. I can't even tell you how many hours of music I have produced with this little thing. This system has evolved over time. This is a controller that came out in 2017. I had 3 or 4 of the earlier versions of Maschine before that, and the Maschine software and hardware combined. So I've kind of evolved with the platform, and I've kind of changed the way that I make music with Maschine's progression. The last 3 or 4 years or so, little incremental things have been changed, but not a whole lot. I still use Maschine for drums primarily, but I also host virtual instruments in there. And before I started using Reaper primarily as my sound making tool, I still used Reaper, but only as kind of a tape machine. So I would create my tracks on Maschine and then throw them over to Reaper for editing and arranging. So I'm going to actually show you that process right now. It's super easy, but it's also limiting. Because Maschine isn't technically a DAW, there are certain features that are common in DAWs that Maschine does not have. Number one is a discrete way to record audio. You can record audio through the sampler module and the audio modules inside a Maschine, but it's not at all like you've seen in Reaper or Ableton so far. It really is a tool for making instrumental music primarily. That served me great for my own personal music because I would make my instrumentals kind of starting in there, and then I would throw them over to Reaper and then add vocals. And I'm just going to show you a little bit of that process and loading up virtual instruments and how fluid it is inside a Maschine. Okay, so what you're looking at here is the Maschine controller with a blank project, and I'm going to toggle over right now, and on this desktop here I'm going to show you that this is a blank Maschine project. This is pretty much what it looks like when you first open the program. There is a vertical list, it looks like, of empty blocks that looks very suspiciously similar to the Ableton Live session view. That's because they added this section of Maschine after the fact, and it is kind of trying to emulate the Ableton session view. This is actually called Ideas view in the Maschine, and it works really well. Actually, if I'm using Maschine, I generally don't even use the arrange view anymore. This is the arrange view. If you click on this little button here, this is kind of the arrange view. You would just lay out different blocks of which they call patterns inside a Maschine, and then you would add, okay, say I want to add a pattern here. These are actually just say clip, 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 clip. But this is a different operation than it used to be in the old version of Maschine. Maschine used to be a lot more manual as far as creating clips were concerned, and it was kind of cumbersome to add and remove things from the arrangement. Once the Ideas view came out, I just said, well, I'll just use the Ideas view. Actually, I was gonna go over to Ableton full time when I realized that session view and Ideas view are pretty much the same in both programs. So instead of, I would use Maschine, which I already knew how to use fluidly, and I would use the patterns that I built inside a Maschine and just throw them over, drag and drop them into Reaper, which I'm going to show you how that's done now. The first thing I'm going to show you on this is how to load up sounds on Maschine. It's a lot more intuitive because you have a piece of hardware in front of you as opposed to just a piece of software that you have to click with a mouse and a giant list of things that appears in front of you that's not necessarily intuitive as far as music making is concerned. It may make sense from an engineer's standpoint, but it doesn't make as much sense to we the musicians. So what this is basically the drum group as there was inside of Ableton. As you can see, there's 16 pads here, 4x4, and I'm just going to go ahead and pick something from this list, and if you'll hear it, you can hear each of these things actually has a preview attached to it. So Native Instruments went through the pain of, having an artist actually make a sample of each of these kits. I'm gonna load up this one right here. This is the 808. This is a classic Roland drum machine from the 1980s, early 1980s. So basically this is this really classic kit, and they've chosen some specific sounds from it that's almost like the original drum machine. So basically you have 16 pads, each of which has a different sound on it. So those are all those classic sounds from the original 808 drum machine. You may recognize 808 as being kind of a loud, kind of boomy bass drum, which is this. This is the long decay kick, which is actually really classic sound for hip hop and has been for years and years. So if you ever hear the term, somebody talk about that's an 808, or let's put an 808 in there, and that's the reference, they're talking about this long decay kick, this analog drum machine kick. That sounds pretty gutsy when you hit it. It's got this resonant tone, it's got this sub, it just shakes the whole place if you have the speakers up. All right, so I'm gonna lay down a real quick drum pattern here, and you're gonna see how quickly I can get this going. So I'm just gonna hold Shift and hit record. I'm at 120. Okay, important thing to note is that I'm at 120 BPM right now. Let's bring it down a little bit because that's a little bit too fast for like hip hop or something like that. I'm just using my mouse to drag this at the top here, the top bar, down to 95. It's a little more hip hop territory. Here we go. All right, so real simple pattern. I just laid in the kick and the snare. I'm gonna go ahead back through, and because by default, Maschine actually has overdub set as the default setting for recording MIDI. So these, as you can recognize probably, these are MIDI notes that just appeared on the screen in real time as I was recording. So I'm gonna add a few little extra things on top, and I'm gonna show you how that works. Here we go. So I'm just gonna do the same thing, Shift record. I'm gonna have a little count in for the metronome. 2, 3, 4. As you can hear, my timing's off, so let's just make things easier. Hit quantize, just like in the other program, but in here it's a piece of hardware, so you can hit Shift quantize, and it gets it closer to where we wanted it to be. So let's hit that again. Piece of cake, right? Like, so I just laid down a beat. What did that take? 10 seconds? That's kind of the benefit of using this platform to make music. It's incredibly, incredibly fast. There is another hardware controller called the Ableton Push that they sell that is actually very closely integrated with Ableton Live. I've never wanted to invest in that equipment just because I know how to use this better. It's very possible that it's just as seamless as a workflow inside of Ableton if Ableton is your vibe. Remember, vibe is very important, so you don't want to end up with a piece of equipment that you don't like using. If you buy an Ableton Push or you buy a machine and you're just not liking how it is, sell it or return it. Like, don't keep pieces of gear that you don't like. Personally, I love this workflow. I love what it looks like. I love everything about it, even the earliest versions. I'm gonna load up another kit here just to show you. This is a 909 kit, cousin of the 808. So I think we went over that in our previous video about Ableton Live and layering virtual instruments in there. So I'm gonna just show you, like, these are just different colors. And the original was just orange and blue. So these buttons were blue and these pads were orange, and that was the only colors you had. And that was just before RGB LEDs, RGB meaning red, green, blue, LEDs were available. And so that was the standard back then. And the screens were awful. They had these awful, kind of very simple LCD screens. Now it's got this is the third version. So it's got these beautiful displays that you can see things while you're browsing or while you're changing the settings on your sounds as you're playing. I would just use this drum beat in anything that I did. And at this point, I'm ready to throw it over to Reaper. So how do I do that? All I have to do is I have this pattern here. If I wanted to individually export these, I could. However, I'm just gonna, for demonstration purposes, I'm just gonna grab it and drop it in. So what I'm gonna be able to do in here is drag and drop the audio straight into Reaper. But the first thing we have to do is actually set the BPM inside of Reaper. And that's just best practices. It's just, otherwise you end up with a mess and mismatched BPMs. So I'm gonna go in here and I'm gonna click on the default in here, which is 120. I'm gonna type in 95 because that's the one we chose inside of Maschine. And I'm gonna toggle back over to Maschine. And then I'm gonna grab this little icon on the far right here that has a W, as you can see. And then I'm gonna drag it off, click and hold, drag it off. And you'll see this little balloon show up. It says pattern 1 with this little squiggle line next to it kind of representing a waveform. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna drag it down to the bottom of my screen on top of the icon that represents the Reaper program, and then it's gonna highlight Reaper and Reaper's gonna show up on my screen. Now I'm just gonna drag and drop this right in, and what we have is 2 bars of an 808 beat that I just made. So I'm gonna hit play on Reaper. So the reason why it has this little kind of thing at the end here, this little clip, you might be able to hear like a little pop at the very, very end. The reason is because I have a setting inside of Maschine enabled called loop optimize, which means that it will optimize the looping mechanism of the audio file that you just exported. So if I grab this in Reaper by default and just drag it out, what it's gonna do is it's gonna just repeat over and over and over again. So instead of having 2 bars, now I have 8 bars, which is kind of awesome. So now I can just keep going. And then, you know, I'll show you a little bit about what I would do next. So go back. So we've got 8 bars now when we only made 2 in Maschine just because of that looping mechanism. So I'm gonna go back into Maschine and I'm gonna build some more stuff. Let's go ahead and build something. Instead of using another kit, I'm gonna hit right click this and I'm gonna hit delete. I'm gonna load up a sound now. So I'm gonna come back over to the hardware here and hit the browser button. So what you're gonna see right now is I'm gonna go and toggle across the top here. See these arrows. You can start with projects, groups, sounds, and you can see it's changing inside of the software as I do this. So we're gonna go over to instruments, and this is gonna list basically all of the compatible instruments, what's called an NKS standard, which is the Native Instruments standard. All of those instruments are actually gonna be in this list. So there's gonna be stuff that's not necessarily Native Instruments, but it's compatible with Native Instruments. So like this ARP 2600 V3 up here, for instance, that is an Arturia instrument, a company called Arturia that I showed you before that made the DX7 and the CS80 emulations of the vintage synths. So ARP 2600 is actually also a emulation of an old vintage synth. We're gonna go past that for now and I'm gonna load up something else. Let's go and we're gonna let's load up Massive X. Of the moment, this is kind of my favorite synthesizer. The original Massive was a really popular software synthesizer about 10 years ago among the EDM crowd, and that whole movement was almost centered around this synthesizer as their primary source of sound for a lot of that music. So it's incredible, but this is the next version up, which is Massive X. Far less popular, kind of underground, but I love this. Like, there's so many great sounds in here. So I'm just gonna go down, and again, we've got these previews for each of the sounds that were painstakingly made. We've got 1,500 different sounds, if you can see here, 1,560 it says. And I'm just gonna scroll down, and each of these is gonna give you a little preview. So some of it's a little more techno-y, some of it's a little more sound design. I'm gonna go in here and actually, these are touch capacitive, so I can touch that and it kind of comes up with this little tag cloud here. And I can scroll through and change the type of instrument I'm looking for, and it will change the results. If you look in the Maschine software right now, you'll see that each of these is changing results. As I go through these, you're gonna see some of them have little stars next to them. Those are my favorites that I've kind of found so far. And you can go and make your own favorites really easily, hitting shift and then hitting set star. And there you go, you've got a favorite. And then the great thing about favorites is that you can hit the star at the top and then it'll only show your favorites. So if I want to clear this and go back to no tags at all, and then I hit start, you could see all of them that I've starred already. There's 38 different sounds that I've already picked out that I really like. So then I can make it a little easier on myself when I'm looking for something to start a song with or to add to an existing track. So I'm going to scroll down here. I'll grab one of these. This one's pretty cool. This is a really basic synthesizer, so... Alright, so let's go down. Alright, so I'm just playing around real quick, trying to find something cool. I think that sounds pretty good. I'm gonna actually go ahead and record that. So in the same way that I recorded the drums, I'm gonna hit browser again, so it just shows me my parameters. So if I want to change some of these parameters, you can actually see that these are changing with the knobs. But if you want to see the whole interface, which can be really intimidating, because that's what a lot of people complained about, was you use this little arrow here inside the software, and it'll pop open your VST, your full interface, so you can actually see what the hell it looks like. So here is the interface, and I'm just going to go through and tweak a couple of these things, and you'll be able to hear what it sounds like when it changes. So WT pause, that's wavetable position. Timbre. It really doesn't matter what these say. Sometimes they say random things like dirt or insult or like some really cute little tags for what these knobs do in here. And then other ones are real obvious, like reverb or, something that makes more sense to somebody who's just using this from the outside. But it's really kind of an intuitive way to use this software, and really just, it's kind of a playground. You just tweak things and listen to what the difference is. And I really don't understand. Like my brain does not scream when I see this interface. I love this interface. I think it's cool. But I also like sci-fi movies, so, take it with a grain of salt. So I'm gonna go ahead and make a little bit of a bass line here. I'm gonna close this out, and then I'm gonna go back to my sound. All right, that's cool. I'll do that. All right, here we go. I'm gonna record. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so that's it. As you can see, before this pattern started, in fact, if I toggle over here and start a new pattern, it says auto in the length section here on the right. That means that when I start recording, it's gonna automatically choose the amount of bars that I want to use to record based on how many things that I input. If I want to extend this later, that's fine. I can double this pattern. I can duplicate this pattern into a different slot up here in the ideas view. But essentially, it stops and it kind of knows automatically what you're doing, and it can choose based on that what the length of the pattern is. So I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna hit restart on this controller. So what it's doing is it's playing both of these patterns at the same time. I'm gonna actually delete this green one real quick just so we can clean it up and just see what we're working on. So there's the 808 drum pattern, there is the bass pattern that I just put together, and it's only 4 bars long. If you wanted to, you could go in here and quantize this. Timing doesn't sound too bad to me. Remember, if you quantize the shit out of everything, it's just gonna make it sound like a robot made it. So there's places for adding quantization to the fullest, and there's also places to just adding it a little bit. If I click on the sound and I go to this keyboard icon, you'll see this looks just like it did in Reaper and Ableton. This is a piano roll, as we were talking about before. I'm just looking at these right now. If I wanted to change these around, I could easily. If I wanted to quantize them, I could. Now there's a nice feature inside of here. You can also do this in the other programs too, but it's great to have it on this controller here, is you can hold down Shift, and then there's this button that says quantize 50% here, which is great, which only gives it a little bit of quantization rather than a huge kind of rigid line it up on the grid quantization. So I just hit shift, quantize 50%, and it doesn't quite line them up with the edge, which is kind of what I wanted. So it gets a little more accurate. If you may have played it off a little bit, you were late or early on the note, but it doesn't squeeze all of the life out of it. That's just kind of what I'm going for here. So, all right. So I've got this Massive Axe patch, this bass line. What am I going to do? The same thing I did before. I'm going to go over here to the W, grab it. It's going to go through the exporting. There you could actually see that because it was slower than the drum beat was. And then I'm going to drag it onto Reaper and let it go. And as you can see, it's now showing the bass line. So I can, this bass line's longer than the drum beat. The drum beat's only 2 bars, I believe. If you scroll in here, you can actually see the loop edges of these things. So if I scroll the end here, you can see when it starts to loop, there's a little notch. There it is. So right at 5 here, there's a little notch that shows you where the loop ends. And then the loop starts over again. So I'm going to drag this out. Here, I'll just show you when I scroll in here. I'm going to drag this out, and you're going to see another notch show up there. And because that setting loop optimizes on, the same thing with the drums happens, where if you listen back, it has this really seamless sound quality to it because it doesn't sound like there's a skip every time the thing loops. And that is primarily because it was optimized coming out of Maschine. You might notice this little icon that showed up when I dragged this in here, and it automatically said 808 kit in this little box. This is actually a function of an add-on in Reaper called SWS. It's a really great little extension. It's free. You can get it off the internet. I think it's donation only. So what it did was it added a special icon that I made just to kind of indicate that there was an 808 in that track. Now, as you can see, there's nothing in this track to indicate what it is because it used the preset name instead of using the synthesizer name. So what I'm going to do right now is actually go in here. I'm going to write Massive X. And as soon as I did that, little icon shows up that says Massive X with a little keyboard under it. So then I can, while I'm browsing, while I'm arranging, I can quickly see what track is what. So that's just one of the functions that Reaper extends to, just to make it a little easier to arrange your scene. So now I've got these 2 clips of audio. I've got a beat and I've got a bass. So this is a little hot here. I think this came in a little bit too overblown. See, there's a little bit of clipping going on there. The top of the waveform's going off the top. I think it's still salvageable. It might be that you have to change the output of Maschine to get a better signal if it is maxing out too much. I'm going to pull it back a little bit in here. Sounds pretty bad. So let's actually go ahead and do that. I'm going to go back into Maschine. And I'm going to go here and I'm going to turn this down. Actually, there's 3 different levels. There's a master, a group, and a sound level inside a Maschine. So I'm just going to go in here. Actually, there's a mixer function. I'm going to go in here to Maschine and hit mixer. And I'm going to see my 2 groups here, 808 kit and group B, which I didn't name. So I'm just going to press this knob here. It's kind of a joystick. If you can see these little dots around the outside, I'm going to press up on the controller. And this turns this mixing menu into the group level. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust this group volume. I'm just going to hit play. I'm going to hit the restart button. And I'm just going to pull this down a little bit more. So I pulled it down a couple of decibels. That means I have a little more headroom inside of Reaper. Headroom just means that I have latitude where I bring in a sound file and there's enough space ahead of it where it's not clipping. I'll show you what that looks like inside of Reaper. So I'll grab this, grab that W, pattern 1 shows up with a little bubble, go over here, go to Reaper, I'm gonna drag it right in. So you can basically, it just says 808, came in right in and changed the icon there. I'm actually gonna delete this track just to make life easy on us. It asks if we wanna delete it, we hit enter, there you're done. So now I've got a new drum beat, I'm gonna scroll this out, and you can see that little notch appearing at the top again. That means it's looping. As you can see, we got a lot of bass coming through on this bass. I'm gonna pull that back a little bit, but the bass isn't maxing out. It's not actually redlining here. The mix is hot, so I'm probably gonna bring these both down a little bit. So I just shift selected those 2 tracks and I brought it down a little bit more. I just had this basic beat. with a pretty hot sounding bass line. So I'm gonna just use this as my bass, and then I'm gonna add a little bit of a lead part, maybe some chords. You know what? Let's add some piano chords over this. All right, I'm gonna scroll back over to Maschine. And you can also do all this. You don't have to use the controller. You can also do all this stuff with a mouse. So to demonstrate, I'm going to do some sound searching now with the mouse. So I'm just going to click on this to get rid of Massive X so I can reset my filters here. And so now I have all my sounds, which is, how many is that? If I hit the browser button on here, it'll be able to see it. I have 27,216 presets. That is a lot. I'm not going to be using nearly any of, probably a very small fraction of those. That's when things going to get kind of overwhelming inside of Maschine or any other kind of virtual instrument package. Each synthesizer and instrument comes with a huge amount of presets available, so it can get really overwhelming really fast. And I'm going to explain to you later in the course how we get around that feeling of overwhelm and actually be able to use these tools in a way that feels more natural. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to go, all right, I'm going to go in here, I'm going to type in piano, all right, and it's going to show me every single piano, everything that's called piano or is tagged piano in my entire Maschine library. So the Maschine library contains drums, it contains effects, it contains groups and instruments and sounds, and so it's all these different things. And this, actually, I'm just set on instruments right now. If I changed it to something else, the piano would stay in that search and you would be in a different section now. It's just called sounds and groups. Now you would find things that maybe have a piano in them or just tagged piano, all that good stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm just go back to instruments right now because I'm looking for an actual piano to play. So I'm going to scroll through some of these things here and just click on them. It does the same thing as if you're using it over here and scrolling through. It's just more fun and more fluid to scroll through presets this way. And you can find presets really fast. So this isn't actually coming up with the things. That's kind of cool. Obviously, this is way too many presets to even try and find a piano. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to narrow down instruments by using the tag cloud here. I'm, again, just going to use my mouse instead of going through with the controller just to show you how you can do it. So you click on piano keys, and that's going to filter your list. And now if you look on the controller here, it says 1,638 results. It's still like an insane amount of piano patches or things called piano, but it's way easier to navigate than that would be otherwise. So yeah, so you've got, some of these are just terrible. Like you'll never use some of them. So this can get really frustrating trying to find something while you're trying to work. All right, that sounds pretty cool. It's a little bit kind of treated, so it's not necessarily a straight up piano. Almost electric, it says here. That's cool. All right, we'll use that one. So it's not starred, it's not something I found just now. So I'm gonna go up here and actually, I'm gonna use the mouse to do it to show you, but on the controller you would just hit the C bank right here on the controller, which is the third one from the top there with the 8 buttons that represent groups. But instead of that, I'm just gonna hit the plus button. It's gonna create a new group for me, and the corresponding light lit up on C on the controller. And as you can see, it's green this time. They just automatically choose these colors. You can change them, of course. Like if I wanted to right click and I wanted to go to color, I could just say, okay, I'd rather that be blue. And now that whole group is blue. Very easy to customize things inside of here. We're gonna load up this piano sound that we found. I'm gonna double click it here, almost electric. It's going to play the preview again one more time, and then it's going to be in our Maschine project. So I'm going to hit the... So I'm just going to throw down something real quick. What I'm going to do before I record though is I'm going to listen to it back, and I'm going to come up with an idea based on what I'm currently listening to. So here we go. I hit my restart button on my controller, or you can also hit this little kind of track backwards button. And that's going to start everything from the beginning, and you're going to hear our cool bass line with our 808 drum kit. The bass progression I already picked out was B, G, D, E, so let's just try and do something like that for our piano and see what sounds good. Cool, all right, I like that. Those are my 4 chords. Let's go. Cool. I like it. So yeah, so we just got our chords in there now. You can dig down and hit this little piano button again. You can see your actual chords being played on top of your timeline. If you see down here, it says 64 sus pedal. 64 just represents the control change message for the MIDI. It's the most commonly used number of control change message to represent sustain pedal inside of MIDI. Suffice it to say that that's your sustain pedal information for all you pianists out there. That's something you definitely need in MIDI, and it makes it sound more realistic, of course. I'm liking how this sounds. It's a little bit off as far as you can see the grid lines, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not mad at that. I'm just gonna grab those. I'm gonna go up to the W up here. Again, same thing as before. Grab it, drag it, and I'm gonna go and pull it down to the Reaper icon at the bottom of the screen, drop it into my Reaper project, and now I have a piano. See, it's a little bit quiet in here. I'm gonna actually bring that up a little bit. There's a knob at the top of this clip. Normally it's just a line. I actually like this better. It's a little modification inside Reaper where I can just pull this up and get the sound clip to be better gain staged. Gain stage just means kind of level with the other sounds that are coming in. So I'm gonna scroll over here, and this is gonna kind of repeat, but I don't really, songs don't normally start with the piano coming in right away or the chords coming in right away. They don't necessarily start like that. So I'm gonna scroll over and I'm just gonna start that maybe on, we'll have that coming in on the 5th bar instead of bar 1, so we can have a little kind of a build up in our arrangement. It's really loud. Let's pull that down. So that is a little off. I'm going to modify the MIDI, so I'm going to go back into Maschine and give it a little bit of a little TLC. So I'm going to delete this. That's the way that it's in here already. I'm going to go back to Maschine, and I'm going to adjust my velocity a little bit and my timing. So I'm just going to drag these over. I'm going to try maybe just this chord that's really bothering me. I'm going to shift quantize 50% and get it a little bit closer, and I'll play it back. So I actually like the level of this chord as it is in here. So I'm going to go in here and go to the bottom here where it says velocity. And as you can see, when I select all three of these little lines come up. I'm just going to pull this up a teeny little bit just so it sounds a little bit better. I like that much better. Okay, so I'm going to grab this W, exporting, drag and drop over the icon, drop it into the scene. Still looks like it's really quiet, but it actually sounded good in there. So let's see what it looks. So it actually sounds pretty good. All right, I'm going to click off the auto here, and I'm going to pull this up a little bit. Sounds good to me. So that is the basics of creating stems or audio clips inside of Maschine and bringing them over to Reaper in order to edit them and arrange them. So I'm going to go ahead and move this over a little bit like we were talking about before and start it in a little later. And then I'm just going to have the bass and the beat at the very beginning. Kind of get our song set up with 4 bars of just bass and drums. Cool. I like that. So that's the basics of laying out a track using Maschine as the instrument or the Groovebox to build your actual audio tracks and then bring them over to Reaper. So that was a really kind of longer than the other explanations were. I find this method really easy actually because I know it so well. That's kind of where that old saying comes in about the best DAW out there is the one that you know how to use, because obviously I know this really well. I can fluidly rip out a song in a couple minutes, whereas it might take 10 minutes or 15 minutes or something to do the same operation just in Reaper or Ableton for me. I'm not as familiar with both of those software as far as MIDI and then just browsing and finding sounds. Use what you're more comfortable with. It's hard to use Maschine on a trial basis because it has a hardware component, so it's not going to be really possible. So you might just have to go maybe to a store or something like that, or try out a friend's to see how you like that workflow, or just buy it and see how it works. And it's not cheap though. I'm not gonna lie to you. It's expensive. This setup is, I think it was like $600. Also comes with a lot of drum sounds kind of for free. So yeah, and it kind of gets you into the Native Instruments ecosystem. But I'm not gonna endorse them in any way. There's plenty of virtual instruments that are built inside of Logic and Ableton, and you don't need to buy third-party stuff if you don't want to.